Ponytails. Read by Scribbler. Best Friends Forever by Obselescence. The wind whipped through Celestia's mane as she flew to the furthest corners of her realm, past the hills and over acres of apple trees. The leaves rustled softly as she flew overhead, juicy red apples bobbing in the breeze. They would be ripe for harvesting soon, but she doubted they would ever be picked. None of the ponies in the village nearby dared to venture this far, and Applejack wasn't quite ready to care for them yet. The crop would be left to rot this year. She shook her head and flew on. A shame, really. Webs of sparkling magic filled the sunset orange skies as she neared the castle, ready to ensnare any Pegasus who got too curious and careless. Celestia broke through them with ease, snapping the spells without slowing down. They were there to keep most ponies out, but Celestia was here on business, and she wasn't most ponies. There were other measures in place to keep out the truly unwelcome guests, and she didn't qualify as one of those. Not yet, at any rate. The castle was a stony grey, almost black against the setting sun. It was slightly smaller than Canterlot Castle, and much blockier, but it had been designed for safety more than beauty, surrounded on all sides by thick walls and tall, dark towers. Imposing, but nothing else. The magical defences, though.
Where?
Celestia muttered to herself, looking for the force field she knew to be there. It took a few moments to spot it, a faint, almost invisible shimmer hanging in the air, and a minute or two more to push past it, even with all the proper counterspells. She stopped for a brief rest on the castle's balcony, just long enough to catch her breath. It hadn't been too much trouble on the whole, but every break and entry took a little more effort, and she wasn't getting any younger, immortality notwithstanding. When she'd finished resting, she opened the balcony doors and stepped into the castle proper. She'd landed at one of Rainbow Dash's rooms, if memory served, and the mess that greeted her inside could only confirm that. Greying Wonderbolt posters covered the walls, marking piles of Wonderbolt action figures, baseball caps, and other merchandise. A single bookshelf stood in the corner, lined with those daring do novels Rainbow Dash had always enjoyed so much, waiting for the day when she'd read them again. Celestia nudged a few piles of junk off to the side and made her way quickly to the door. The nursery wasn't all that far away now, and the sooner she could get there, the better. The halls were dark but clean, as she'd come to expect. The door to Rainbow Dash's room shut behind her as soon as she was clear of it, and an enchanted broom soon arrived to sweep up the dust she'd left behind. The corners of her mouth curved just slightly upward as she walked on, the broom swishing in time with her hoofsteps, neat and efficient as always. Some things never changed. The door to the nursery was made of plain walnut, marred only by a few scribbled doodles and scratches, the marks of childhood. Celestia opened it as quietly as she could, hardly bothering to break the spells on it. She knew she had to be tripping a dozen odd magical tripwires and alarms in doing so, but it was as good a way as any of grabbing Twilight's attention, and she didn't want to wake the babies. She crept softly through the darkness of the nursery, stepping lightly past scattered party hats and ne'er-do-well action figures. She stopped at one of the cribs, Pinkie Pie's, she supposed, and smiled down on the sleeping filly tucked beneath the covers.
"Don't worry. I'm here now,"
she said, running her hoof through Pinkie's little pink mane.
"And what are you doing here?
A voice whispered from behind her.
I'm only visiting, Twilight,
said Celestia, turning to face her former student. It was hard to see much of Twilight in the dimness of the nursery, but she could tell that Twilight was tall enough now to stare her straight in the eye. So much had changed in so little time. It wasn't all that long ago that Twilight had looked up to her. In a manner of speaking, of course.
The summer sun celebration is coming up soon, and you didn't respond to any of my invitations, so naturally I thought I'd come down and check up on things.
I don't respond to any of your letters anymore. I thought I made that clear last time.
Hence my concern.
Twilight paused.
Well, as you can see, we're fine,
she said curtly.
Now back off from her.
If you insist.
Celestia stepped well away from Pinky's crib. It wasn't worth arguing over. Not that she was strong enough to argue with Twilight in the first place.
I was only
doing what you always do when you break in,
Twilight finished.
Well...
Twilight's horn began to glow, and the air around her hummed softly. Celestia gasped, the breath forced from her chest by the pressure of Twilight's power. She used a little of her own magic to push it back, just enough to keep herself breathing. It was impressive in a way. Twilight hadn't been nearly this strong the last time she had tried to intimidate her. She always had been a quick study.
I think you should go now, Celestia, don't you?
Said Twilight.
I haven't spoken with your friends yet.
Celestia grinned weakly.
I'd like to hear what they think first.
They don't want you here either.
Twilight's horn glowed steadily brighter, the hum pitching up to a dangerous whine.
I told you that last time. They told you that last time.
Celestia groaned as the pressure increased. She could feel her legs shaking, her knees threatening to buckle out from under her. Beside her, Pinkie Pie whimpered and squirmed.
I'd like to hear it again.
For the last time, no!
Sparks of magic crackled around her, and the room itself started to shake.
You aren't taking them from me. They don't want you to, and I won't let you. There's nothing you can say that will change any of that. So go away already!
She stomped her hooves on the floor. Suddenly, Pinkie Pie burst into tears, wailing as loudly as her little lungs could manage. Twilight gasped as the other foals also started to cry.
Now look what you've done!
The lights switched on, and Twilight darted to Pinkie's crib.
There. No, don't cry, Pinkie. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking,
she said, taking the little foal up in her hooves.
Weren't you?
Celestia muttered. Twilight ignored that little remark. Her attention focused entirely on the wailing Pinkie.
Look! A party hat! You like these, don't you, Pinkie?
She levitated a polka-dotted party hat up from the floor. She put the party hat on and dangled another, rainbow-striped, up in front of Pinkie's face.
You can't have a party without them, right?
For a moment, Pinkie stopped crying, her gaze transfixed on the rainbow party hat.
There we go,
said Twilight, smiling.
It's party time. We'll figure out what we're celebrating after I cleared everything else up, okay?
She put it carefully on Pinkie's head, making sure it didn't catch on her bouncy pink mane. Pinkie, for her part, simply giggled and made no further protests as Twilight lowered her back into her crib.
One down,
Twilight sighed. She looked back to Celestia.
And I hope you're happy with all of this.
Celestia shrugged. If only she were. She waited patiently as Twilight ran from crib to crib, soothing each of her friends with their favourite toys. A glittering blue sapphire for Rarity, a shiny red apple for Applejack. Soon enough, the room was quiet and calm, save for some idle babbling from Pinkie Pie.
Yeah?
She gurgled, looking up at Celestia with wide-open eyes.
Yes, Pinkie.
Celestia smiled down on her.
You may call me that if you'd like.
Party!
She pointed to the rainbow party hat on her head.
Well, I suppose I could party too,
said Celestia, picking up a silver and gold foil party hat. She looked to Twilight on the other side of the room.
That is, if your caretaker will allow me to stay.
Which I wouldn't count on. She's not invited, Pinky. She'll be leaving in a few minutes.
Twilight set Rainbow Dash back in her crib.
What?
Pinky's face screwed up, her eyes starting to water. Twilight grimaced.
Okay. Don't cry. Of course she's invited to. Every pony's welcome at a Pinkie Pie party.
She glared again at Celestia.
For now, anyway.
For now,
Celestia agreed.
Why don't you show me around, Twilight? Before the party, that is. It's been such a long time since we've talked, you know.
A long time indeed, she realized. How long had it been, exactly, since they'd last spoken without threatening each other? Decades, certainly. Was it already pressing on centuries?
And, of course, it will give your friend some time to rest,
she said quietly.
Well...
Twilight looked to Pinky, who only nodded in approval. She sighed.
Well, fine, if it'll keep you from bothering them.
Celestia stood by the nursery's door as Twilight kissed each of her friends a quick goodbye.
Don't do anything too crazy while I'm gone, alright?
She whispered as she passed by Pinky's crib.
And don't put that sapphire in your mouth, Rarity. That used to be part of your favorite dress, remember?
She said, chuckling quietly as she passed by Rarity's crib. When she'd said all her goodbyes, Twilight dimmed the lights and met Celestia at the door.
Come on then, let's get this over with. I'm running out of patience,
she said, shutting it gently behind her. Celestia smiled.
Didn't you tell me once that you'd always have time in your schedule for me?
She asked, only half joking. Twilight frowned.
Didn't you tell me you'd always support me, no matter which path I chose?
I suppose I did,
said Celestia, her smile evaporating.
Things change. Everything does, given enough time.
Twilight beckoned her along.
Unless you're a princess, that is.
Unless you're a princess,
Celestia agreed quietly.
And sometimes not even then.
She followed Twilight down the corridors in silence, looking occasionally off to the sides. She'd never paid much attention to it before, whenever she'd broken in, but the castle was filled with various souvenirs, keepsakes, and portraits. Memories, she supposed, of all the years Twilight had spent with her friends. Rainbow Dash's old flying awards, Pinky's ancient macaroni art, a faded pink scarf woven with butterfly patterns. Years and years of friendship were kept on these walls. Far, far too many years. Twilight broke the quiet first.
I don't know why you keep trying. You have to know you can't take them from me. Not anymore,
she said as they walked down the stairs to the second floor. Celestia raised an eyebrow.
Can't I?
You can't,
said Twilight simply.
No,
Celestia admitted.
I can't.
Maybe if Luna had been there, it would have been possible to fight Twilight evenly. But, well, perhaps not even then.
I should have put a stop to this a long time ago. You've improved much faster than I could have ever guessed.
I had a great teacher.
Twilight gave her a rueful little smile.
And I still appreciate everything she did for me. I just don't understand why she hates me now.
I expect she's just disappointed. You showed so much promise.
Showed? Past tense?
There was a time when I would have given anything to see you fulfill that promise. But you do have to learn to let go.
She stopped to look at a picture of Applejack, aged and elderly, hanging on the wall. Beside it hung a picture of baby Applejack, cuddling her very first apple. A Granny Smith, if she wasn't mistaken.
She still grows the best apples. I'm going to teach her how to handle the orchard when she's ready for it. She'll be a pro again in no time, and once we start harvesting, I can teach Pinky about apple pies again, and...
Celestia nodded absently, listening vaguely to what Twilight was saying while she studied the two Applejacks on the wall. They both had Applejack's bright green eyes, sparkling with honesty and good-natured cheer. And in both pictures, Those eyes seemed very tired. She couldn't help but wonder if it was the same Applejack staring out through them.
And maybe once we've done that, we could set up another iron pony competition between her and Rainbow Dash. We haven't had one of those in a while. It'd be a great jumpstart on rediscovering the friendship. And I could even—
Do you ever think about what you're doing to her?
Celestia interrupted, reaching up to take the baby Applejack's picture off the wall. Almost immediately, a sharp stinging sensation bit into her hoof, and she was forced to draw it back. Even the pictures were protected by magic, it seemed.
What I'm doing for her?
Twilight corrected, without missing a beat.
For all of them. They're happy. I'm happy. The only one who isn't happy about this is you. And don't you ever forget about that.
An enchanted broom passed by them, swishing across the floor as if they weren't there. Twilight coughed.
Pinky seemed rather happy to see me this time,
said Celestia, nursing her injured hoof.
Pinky's still too young to know better. She'll grow out of it. She always does.
Twilight shrugged. Celestia remembered her last visit only too well. How desperately they'd all kicked and screamed. How they had yelled for Twilight to save them from the awful Princess Celestia, come to take them away from their very best friend. Where had they heard that about her, she wondered.
Well, perhaps someday she won't.
Twilight snorted.
Is that what you're waiting for?
In a manner of speaking.
Celestia turned away from the pictures of Applejack, both old and young.
I suppose I'm still hoping you'll change your mind. It's not too late to stop.
There's no reason to. You keep treating this like it's something wrong, like it's evil.
She stomped the floor, stones cracking from the force.
I hate that.
Not evil, per se,
said Celestia, careful not to upset Twilight too quickly. That, perhaps, would have been unwise.
But aging is natural. Age spells aren't. You didn't have to cast them on your friends.
No, I didn't,
Twilight said darkly.
But you taught me to never give up on them.
I suppose it's my fault then, if that's all you learned.
Celestia sighed.
I'd hoped I was a better teacher than that.
They entered into what could have passed for a throne room if it weren't lined with bookshelves and occupied by a large bed. Twilight's, Celestia supposed. She stopped by another ornament, kept beside the bed on a nightstand. A purple dragon scale.
Did Spike ever approve of your little foray into age magic?
He was asleep before he even found out.
Twilight took a breath on the scale and polished it until it shined. She smiled fondly at her reflection in it.
He'll wake up someday, though when the hibernation cycle ends, and when he does, I'm sure he'll side with me on this one.
Would Fluttershy?
Silence. Said Twilight, turning slowly towards Celestia. She set the scale down on the nightstand.
What was that?
Would Fluttershy agree with you?
The air began to spark and crackle again with that familiar magic charge.
What do you think you know about Fluttershy?
Twilight whispered.
I'm only asking,
said Celestia calmly.
Haven't you thought about what Fluttershy would have wanted?
Don't ask about things you don't know anything about!
Twilight snapped, her horn glowing bright. The entire room began to shake. Books fell from their shelves, and the floor itself rumbled beneath Celestia's hooves.
You weren't there when she died. You didn't see.
No, I didn't,
said Celestia.
I'm sorry, Twilight. I didn't mean...
She was so tiny. I could see her ribs through her skin. She couldn't do things for herself anymore. Almost like a baby. It wasn't fair. She was so old.
Twilight.
I couldn't just let that happen to the rest of them. Even if they didn't want. Even if they couldn't see. They came around eventually. It only took a few tries. They were happier starting over. We were happier starting over.
Twilight, please listen to yourself.
You be quiet! You aren't going to take them away from me!
Twilight shouted, and the room shook again. The shelves themselves tumbled over, and the floor cracked. The castle would fall if this kept up.
What do you know about friendship anyway? How many friends have you ever had?
How many?
Celestia repeated quietly. She took a step forward, struggling to keep herself steady in the face of so much power.
I've had many friends in my time, Twilight. I've watched so many of them succumb to age. More than I've ever spoken of, and more than you've ever known.
Another step. She was standing now, almost in front of Twilight. Just a bit closer.
Then where are they? How many did you save? Or did you just stand back and watch them all die?
Twilight demanded, cracks running up the stony grey walls.
Is that why you can't leave us alone? Because I didn't?
Celestia took another step forward.
Do you want to know why I think this is wrong?
She asked.
How I know it's a horrible burden to wrest your friends from time's grasp?
Twilight's magic was approaching hurricane force now. Books and shelves flew in a spiral around the room, colliding with the bed and Spike's purple scale. Still, Celestia took another step forward, until she was standing face to face with her former student. Together in the eye of the storm.
Do you really want to know how many friends I've saved?
She reached out a hoof and brushed it gently through Twilight's mane.
1.
Instantly, the storm grew calm. Books and their shelves falling to the floor. Twilight's horn burnt out. Her eyes widened as she slumped back.
No, you didn't!
And in that moment, it happened. A sphere of pure light shone from Celestia's horn, straight through Twilight's heart. Too fast for a counterspell. Not that Twilight had been in any state to cast one. It was over.
I'm sorry, Twilight. It's my fault.
Celestia whispered as Twilight fell to the floor. She looked back briefly at Twilight's body as she left the room, but not for too long. A minute or so later, she left Twilight behind and set out for the nursery. Twilight's friends had waited for her long enough, and it wouldn't have been fair to delay any longer. She'd spent too many centuries grieving for her own mistakes, paying penance for the burden she placed on her most faithful student. Watching, waiting, hoping that she wouldn't have to... Well, it was time now to let go. The castle seemed strangely empty and quiet with Twilight gone. The enchantments on the brooms had died along with their creator, and the corridors lay in ruins from Twilight's wrath. Celestia stepped quickly over the rubble, avoiding anything that had fallen from the walls. She wondered, briefly, if that had been one of her own letters she'd seen framed on the wall, but she didn't stop to look. It was too late now for any of that to matter. The nursery was in no better shape than the rest of the castle, but it seemed intact at least, and Twilight's friends were all unharmed, which was what mattered.
Twilight?
Asked Rarity, peeking up from her crib when Celestia entered. The rest of the foals looked up too, eager to see their old friend again.
Twilight back? Twilight back?
Twilight.
For a moment, Celestia's breath caught in her throat.
Twilight is taking a very long and well-earned rest. It's my job now to take you all home.
Oh,
Said Rarity, uncertainly.
Twilight back soon?
You'll see her again someday.
Said Celestia.
I can't say much more than that now, but you'll see her again.
The fillies all nodded.
Promise?
Pinky asked.
Yes, of course.
Celestia put on her bravest smile for them, blinking her tears back before they could see. And they would see Twilight. Not for a long time, perhaps, but someday, without her age magic to keep them young, they would all find themselves together again.
I promise.
that was Best Friends Forever. It was written by Obselescence and read by Scribbler, with special guest voice actors Ghostly Hamburger as Celestia and Wish Lotus as Twilight Sparkle. Right, okay, thank you for listening. I'm not entirely sure what to say at the end of this one. The first thing that's popping into my head is that Obselescence is an author whom I read a fic of way back at the beginning of my fanfic reading career. He wrote Love in All Its Forms, which, to this day, remains one of my most popular readings. And, as an embarrassing confession, I totally mispronounced his name in that. I totally mispronounced, Pascowite? Yeah, I mispronounced Pascowite the first time I read one of his stories as well. So, it should have been Obselescence, but at the beginning I pronounced it Obelescence. Probably I thought it was some kind of obelisk reference. And last week, Pascowite, when I first read his story, it was Pascoite. What can I say? I'm not a geologist. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this week's fanfic reading. This is the first time that Ghostly Hamburger has appeared on my channel, though I've known her for a very long time. And I think she did a pretty good job as Celestia. And Wish Lotus, gee, bloody hell. I've never met somebody who emotes that much when voice actors and I collaborate, and I do this for other people's projects as well, we send each other readings of lines, and we always send multiple copies of line reads. And editors, like myself, or like other fanfic readers, we choose the best line reads when we're editing the stories together. And that's one of the most time-consuming things, is listening to the line reads and choosing the best one and editing it all in. But usually you can tell. There's one good line read or a couple of good line reads, and you listen to them a few times and then you know which one it is. And I agonised over Wish Lotus because she's such a good actress. I couldn't pick between them. So having two such strong voice actresses working on this, yeah, it was a pleasure to work with their lines. Well, this is the second in the month of Darkfics. This one's Darkfic with a hint of sadness to it. A bloody big hint of sadness. Next week? Well, you'll just have to watch this space to see what comes out next week. Suki is... well, I am in the study at the moment. This is why I've got this strange echo and a really loud clock. This is not the ticking clock room. This clock is a new addition. But I'm in here doing paperwork once again. I could have gone and run upstairs and got my microphone, but Suki is laying next to me and is asleep under a blanket. She's had a very busy day because we met a cat when we were out for a walk earlier, and she's not fond of cats, and she ran to the end of her lead, and she's not supposed to run, so brought her home, and she's very, very tired now. And she's having a snooze, so I shall get back to my paperwork. And in other news, there is a post I've made on Finfiction that I'm going to link in the description below, because I can't link it in the video. But it is sort of an advert, and just sort of an invitation to any fanfic authors out there, or wannabe fanfic authors, or anybody really who wants to get involved, that a number of female VAs and I, we had a Skype call a few months ago in which we pratted about, and we were doing Applejack impressions, and we kind of made up a stupid skit about too many Applejacks, effectively, and what it would be like to have more than one personality type of Applejack in the vicinity. And that kind of grew into, I started a fanfic about it. But it is not a regular fanfic, in that I am not writing this alone. It is a collaborative fanfic, or an interfic, interactive fiction. Way back in the day, when I was, I started my fanfic career on Internetter's Nutboard in 2002, which was when I was in X-Men Evolution fandom, and we used to do collaborative fanfiction, or interfics, all the time then. And a few years ago I started up the Interfix Pro Boards, which is a message board for people to collaborate on fanfics. And it kind of fell by the wayside after I got out of Yu-Gi-Oh fandom. And I've resurrected it fairly recently so that we can put together an actual story based on this called Crisis of Infinite Applejacks, based on The title itself is based on Crisis on Infinite Earths, which remains one of my favourite comic crossover events. The very first kind, I think it's the very first of its kind, one of the very first of its kind, for DC Comics in the 80s, and written by Marv Wolfman, who's like, one of my favourite comic authors. Oof. And, yeah, so I'm putting the link below, and this is an official invitation to anybody who wants to come and help us write it. If it takes off, then Lost Narrator and I kind of have plans to turn it into an actual reading. But only if it takes off, and only if it... Yeah. Oh, well, let's just... I'm in the territory of making stupid noises now, so I'm going to shut up. Go and click that, and listen to all the other fanfic readings, and yeah. I hope everybody has been listening to the second instalment of Truth Be Told on the Lost Narrators channel, and the second instalment of Something Sweet to Bite on Emogak's channel, both of which are wonderful, wonderful Halloween fictions. And also, although it's not a Halloween reading, Goombas has been bringing out a really, really good Chengar Kordath fic called A Moment in the Sun. I think it's called A Moment in the Sun? I was listening to it on the dog walk. But it's about Sunset Shimmer and Celestia, and apparently, based on my reaction to his reading, I really, really like hearing about these two characters. So, quite possibly you'll be hearing something about them from me in the future. And I shall shut up now. Go and listen to all their readings, because they're really, really good. And Ilya Leonov has got a reading that came out that I should have said about last week called Dream. Go and listen to that. Yeah. Be lovely to each other, and good night, everybody.